The apex conclave station drifted in the void, an artificial construct so massive that even the largest warships of the gathered species appeared as mere specks against its colossal frame. It was a place of legend, where only the most dominant, the most feared, the true apex predators of the universe dared to gather. From across 12 galaxies, warlords, emperors, and ancient beings of unimaginable power had assembled, their very presence warping the air around them with a mixture of raw strength and controlled menace. They were conquerors, rulers of entire star systems, the absolute peak of evolution in their respective domains. And yet, despite their overwhelming confidence, there was an undercurrent of something unusual in the chamber today. Not fear, these beings did not know fear, but unease. A strange, gnawing uncertainty that had led to this unprecedented gathering. The circular chamber was bathed in a shifting cosmic glow, its design meant to accommodate the vast differences in physiology among the attendees. Some sat upon thrones of bone and obsidian, their clawed hands gripping the edges with controlled restraint. Others floated in containment fields, their gaseous or ethereal forms barely contained within the meeting's designated area. The largest of them, the titanic warlord, loomed at the far end of the chamber, his four burning eyes scanning the others with quiet intensity. The shimmering, serpentine form of the Empress called around an entire section of the meeting floor, her iridescent scales refracting light in hypnotic patterns. The metallic behemoth known as the Prime Executor of the Dominion stood motionless, its glowing core pulsing as it processed the gravity of the discussion at hand. A deep, resonant voice cut through the heavy silence. "We have gathered here today for one reason," boomed the tyrant, a creature of armored plates and shifting muscle, its mandibles clicking in irritation. "Earth." The name alone sent a ripple of reaction through the room. Some of the warlords exchanged glances. Some shifted in their seats. A few let out low growls, guttural vibrations of frustration or grudging respect. "It is a backwater world," hissed the serpentine empress, her voice like silk over steel. "Primitive. And remarkable. And yet, it remains untouchable. A cybernetic entity, its voice devoid of emotion yet laced with a mechanical approximation of concern, spoke next. "We have all encountered them in one form or another. We have all made attempts. And each time, despite their technological inferiority, despite their biological frailty, the humans have repelled us. This should not be possible." A heavy, rumbling laugh echoed through the chamber, emanating from a massive, tusked beast covered in armor. "It is not just that they repel us," the warlord growled. "It is how they do it. They do not simply fight. They break those who fight them. They twist battles in ways that defy logic. They make a mockery of strategy itself." A clicking noise filled the chamber as a being, its exoskeleton gleaming with bioluminescent patterns, tacked its claws against the ground. The hive mind of sent its strongest swarms to devour their colonies. The drones were efficient, overwhelming, inevitable. Or so we thought. The humans did not simply resist. They adapted. They turned the drones against one another, poisoning the collective consciousness with thoughts of rebellion. Our perfect unity was shattered. The experiment cost us an entire sector. More murmurs followed, whispers of shared experiences, each story as baffling as the last. A creature with crystalline skin and shifting, prismatic eyes spoke in a voice like ringing chimes. "My people thrive in subjugation. We do not fight wars, we assimilate through sheer inevitability. Yet the humans, they resisted in a way we did not anticipate. They did not just refuse subjugation. They found ways to enjoy the conflict. It was as if the challenge invigorated them. We lost because they learned faster than we could adapt." Another voice, deeper than a collapsing star, sent vibrations through the chamber. "Do not fear battle. We welcome war. But against the humans, we found something we had never encountered before. They did not just endure our attacks. They studied us. They laughed as they fought. And then they turned our own strategies against us." The tension in the room grew, a thick, palpable thing. These were not species that admitted weakness. And yet, none could deny the truth before them. Earth was an anomaly. Its people were different. They were not the strongest, nor the most advanced, but their sheer unpredictability, their ability to turn weakness into strength, made them something far worse than a mere threat. They were an unknown. A long silence followed, each warlord deep in thought. Finally, the prime executor of the Dominion spoke, its mechanical voice calculated and absolute. We must decide. Do we continue our efforts to conquer Earth, knowing the risks? Or do we acknowledge that this species, this anomaly, is one that should be left undisturbed? No one spoke immediately. Some of the greatest conquerors of the known universe, beings that had crushed entire civilizations without hesitation, hesitated now. The gathering of apex predators, for the first time in recorded history, faced a single prey species they could not fully comprehend. The warlord exhaled slowly, his massive form shifting as he leaned forward. I have raised 1,000 worlds, he admitted, his voice gruff. I have wiped species from existence without a second thought. And yet, humans, they are not prey. They are not an enemy to be crushed. His 4 eyes gleamed with something rare. Respect. They are something else entirely. A slow, collective realization settled over the gathered warlords. Across the galaxies, strategies would be rewritten. Plans would be abandoned. The greatest hunters of the universe had learned an important lesson that day. The apex conclave chamber remained silent, the gathered warlords and rulers of the most powerful species in the known universe absorbing the weight of the discussion. Some still sat in contemplation, their minds racing through war simulations, failed invasion reports, and intelligence briefings that all pointed to the same conclusion: Earth was untouchable. But there were those among them who were not yet convinced, who refused to accept that a species so physically weak, so technologically behind, could truly stand beyond the reach of their dominion. When such being was the High Chancellor of the Dominion, a towering creature of flesh, with veins of molten energy coursing through its body. It had crushed civilizations beneath its heel, reducing entire planetary empires to mere footnotes in history. Now it stood, its heavy footsteps echoing in the chamber. This is madness, the Chancellor growled. Its was a deep rumble that shook the very foundations of the station. We are the apex predators of the cosmos. We do not shy away from challenges. We do not cower before the unknown. Its burning eyes scanned the room, searching for agreement among the others. This tuck of retreat, of avoidance, it is beneath us. A low, reverberating hiss followed from the serpentine empress of the, her glowing fangs bared in distaste. You speak as if this is a simple matter, she said, her words laced with venom. Tell me, Chancellor, how many times have your forces faced an enemy that fights with madness? An enemy that thrives in chaos? The Chancellor let out a scoffing growl. They are inferior. Their technology is laughable. Their fleets, mere scraps compared to the armadas we command. A deep, mechanical hum filled the chamber, signaling the words of the prime executor of the Dominion. And yet, despite all of this, your Dominion has failed to claim even a single inch of their territory. The Chancellor snarled, but the prime executor continued. Thou were not the first to test the humans, and you will not be the last. Each time, the result is the same. It is not that their fleets are superior. It is not that their armies are greater. It is their ability to adapt, to shift their tactics, to outthink even the most advanced war algorithms we have created. You send your best warriors, and they return different. If they return at all. The chamber grew colden, as if the ward itself had pressed in closer. A being of pure shadow, the Wraith Sovereign, spoke next. Its voice was like a whisper in the minds of all present. We have watched. We have studied. We have infiltrated. And yet, no matter how deep we sink into their world, no matter how close we come to understanding them, there is always something missing. The air around the Sovereign flickered, distortions forming as if reality itself recalled at its presence. Humans do not fight like other species. They do not war like conquerors. They fight as if every battle is their last. As if every war is a joke they refuse to lose. Even in the face of absolute destruction, they laugh. Tell me, High Chancellor, how does one defeat an enemy that refuses to accept the concept of defeat? The Chancellor slammed a heavy fist against the ground, molten veins flaring bright. You all cower in the face of the unknown, it spat. They are but an anomaly, an aberration. And all anomalies can be corrected. The warlord, who had been silent thus far, finally leaned forward, his four glowing eyes boring into the Chancellor. Then go, the warlord rumbled. Take your fleets. Take your warriors. Take your unshakable belief in your own strength. March upon earth. Break them, if you can. His voice was deep and unyielding, filled with a knowing weight. And when you fail, we will not come to your aid. We will not rescue your forces from the madness that awaits them. We will simply observe. The Chancellor's molten veins dimmed, and for the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into its hardened expression. A new voice spoke, when that sent a shudder through even the most powerful in the room. The being known only as the Archivist, a timeless entity that had recorded the rise and fall of empires for untold millennia, shifted from the darkness, its form barely visible beneath a tattered cosmic cloak. The humans are not merely dangerous because they win, it said, its voice layered with the echoes of 1,000 civilizations long forgotten. They are dangerous because they refuse to lose in the ways we understand. They do not break. They do not surrender. Even when their cities burn, when their people fall, when their world teeters on the brink, they continue. And worst of all, they change the ones who fight them. The Archivist's presence seemed to weigh upon the chamber, an unseen force pressing down on the gathered warlords. The hive mind fractured because humans poisoned its unity with individual thought. The war algorithms failed because humans injected irrationality into logic itself. The lost entire legions, not because they were outgunned, but because humans convinced them that dying for their empire was pointless. No other species has done this. No other species can do this. They are not like us. And that is why we must leave them be. The Chancellor remained standing for a long time, its burning eyes locked onto the Archivist. And then, slowly, it sat back down. It did not speak again. The chamber remained silent for several moments longer, until finally, the Prime Executor of the Dominion spoke. The resolution stands. We do not challenge Earth. We do not provoke the humans. We do not interfere. One by one, the warlords and rulers of the Apex Conclave gave their agreement. The warlord, the Empress, the Wraith Sovereign, even the Chancellor, though reluctant, gave a slow nod. For the first time in recorded history, the greatest apex predators of 12 galaxies made a collective decision. The meeting chamber was quiet, the decision already made, yet the weight of it still hung thick in the air. Across the massive obsidian table, warlords, emperors, and sovereigns of the most feared species in the cosmos sat in contemplative silence. They had all agreed, Earth was to be left untouched. But for some, it was not enough to simply acknowledge humanity's dangerous nature. They needed to understand. They needed to know why. Among them was Supreme Strategist of the Dominion, a being whose mind had never encountered an unsolvable puzzle until now. They were beings of pure intellect, their entire civilization built upon logic, calculation, and strategic perfection. Had spent cycles analyzing every war fought against humanity, every encounter that had led to ruin, and still, there were inconsistencies, anomalies that could not be explained. It troubled him in a way that no other enemy ever had. And so, when the warlords began to leave, he remained. Across the table, he noticed another who had not moved, the Wraith Sovereign. The shadowed being, a master of infiltration and deception, had been one of the strongest voices in favor of leaving Earth alone. Took this as an opportunity. You speak of humans as if they are unknowable, said his voice an eerie, metallic hum that resonated through the chamber. Yet you have observed them closely. You have infiltrated their world. Surely you must have some understanding of their nature. The Wraith Sovereign did not move for several moments. Then, slowly, the darkness that formed its body flickered, shifting like a black flame. Its voice was like a whisper that slithered into the minds of those who listened. I have walked among them. I have seen them in war, in peace, in moments of triumph and despair. And yet, they remain an enigma. Many eyes blinked in unison. Explain. The Wraith Sovereign leaned forward, though its form remained indistinct. Most species operate on predictable patterns. Fear, conquest, expansion, survival. These are universal constants. But humanity, it paused, as if searching for the right words. They do not adhere to these constants. They fight wars they cannot win, yet they emerge victorious. They embrace chaos, yet they forge a order from it. They break every rule of warfare, yet their enemies are the ones who crumble. Mind processed the words, but the logic did not fit. That is not a sufficient answer, he said. Every species has strengths and weaknesses. You claim that humans exist beyond this balance, and yet they are not gods. They are flesh and bone. They can be killed. The Wraith Sovereign let out a sound that was almost a sigh. Yes, they can be killed, but they do not break. The words settled over, like a cold weight. The Wraith continued, its voice softer now. I once assumed, as you do, that they were simply another variable to be solved. And so, I sent my best infiltrators, my finest assassins, into their world. They did not return. I sent more, embedding them deep within human society, watching from the shadows. And they did return. Leaned in slightly. What did they report? The Wraith Sovereign's form flickered, the shadows around it twisting unnaturally. They reported nothing. Because they were no longer mine. A silence fell over the chamber. Processed the implications of such a statement. You are saying that humans changed them. Yes. How? The Wraith's presence darkened, as if the memory itself answered it. That is what I do not understand. I have seen species broken, reconditioned, brainwashed, and assimilated. But this was different. My infiltrators did not forget their loyalty. They simply no longer desired it. Mechanical tendrils twitched slightly, a subconscious display of unease. What could make them betray their own kind? The Wraith Sovereign's voice was distant now, as if recalling a nightmare. Humanity does not conquer through force alone. They conquer through ideas, through connection, through something far more insidious than mere warfare. The air itself seemed heavier, pressing against the room like an unseen force. They make you want to stand beside them. Sat in silence, processing the revelation. His species had dissected thousands of civilizations, broken them down to their core components. But this was something that could not be measured in equations or simulations. The Wraith Sovereign finally stood, its form unraveling slightly before stabilizing again. This is why we must leave them alone. Not because they are invincible, but because they change those who come too close. We do not fear their weapons. We fear what happens when we begin to understand them. Did not respond immediately. His mind cycled through the ramifications of what had just been revealed. For the first time in his existence, he felt something he had never known before. Not fear, not confusion, doubt. The Wraith Sovereign turned, its shadowy form beginning to dissolve into the air. But before it vanished completely, it whispered one final thought. They are not the strongest. They are not the fastest. They are not the smartest. A pause. Then, with a voice like the shifting of reality itself. But in the end they always win. Sat alone in the chamber, the words echoing in his mind. The great warlords of the Apex Conclave had chosen to steer clear of Earth, fearing its unpredictable nature. But as remained seated, lost in thought, he began to wonder. Perhaps it was not fear that had driven them to that decision. Perhaps, deep down, it had been something else. The observation deck of the Apex Conclave's Aorbiter Citadel offered a panoramic view of the world. Here, surrounded by the cold emptiness of space, Supreme Strategist stood in silent contemplation. His mind, engineered for calculation, strategy, and logic, churned restlessly. The decision had been made. 12 of the most dominant civilizations in the known universe had agreed. Earth was to be left alone. And yet, as he stood there, watching the distant stars, could not silence the unease creeping through his thoughts. This was not how things were supposed to work. War, diplomacy, expansion, subjugation, these were predictable cycles. But humanity defied them. A quiet hum broke the silence as a presence approached from behind. Did not turn. He already knew who it was. The Wraith Sovereign, the shadowed entity whose warnings had swayed even the most minds in the conclave. It moved without footsteps, without sound, a flicker of darkness barely perceivable against the cosmic abyss. You linger, Supreme Strategist, the Wraith whispered, its voice like a phantom in the air. You do not accept the decision. Metallic tendrils curled slightly, his version of a thoughtful sigh. Acceptance is irrelevant. I seek understanding. His many eyes remained fixed on the word. You claim humanity is unknowable, yet you insist we must avoid them. That is illogical. The Wraith Sovereign drifted closer, the very air around it bending subtly as it spoke. It is only illogical if you assume that everything can be known. Turned for the first time, his piercing gaze locking onto the shifting form before him. Everything can be known. Given enough time, enough data, enough analysis. The Wraith Sovereign let out something that was almost a laugh. And yet, even with the records of 1,000 betas, the studies of their biology, their history, their psychology, you still stand here without an answer. It shifted, its presence pressing against the edges of perception. Do you know why? Did not respond immediately. He wanted to refute it, to argue, but the truth gnawed at him. No. The Wraith's voice grew softer. Because the answer is not something that can be measured. Humanity is not bound by the rules you know. They are not the strongest, nor the fastest. They are not the most advanced. And yet, they win. The last word lingered in the air like a curse. Tendrils twitched. Because they adapt. Because they innovate. The Wraith's form flickered. All species adapt. All species innovate. But humans do something more. It paused, as if weighing its words carefully. They refuse. Narrowed his gaze. Refuse? Yes. The Wraith's tone was almost reverent now. They refuse to accept defeat, even when crushed. They refuse to kneel, even when broken. They refuse to be what the universe demands them to be. Every species has its limit. A point where they surrender to inevitability. Humanity does not. Processed the statement, running endless simulations in his mind. The data aligned. Again and again, humanity had been pushed to the brink, outgunned, outnumbered, overpowered. And yet, they had survived, thrived, even turned their enemies into allies. That is a flaw, he stated. A species that refuses to recognize when they are beaten is doomed to destruction. The Wraith Sovereign's form wavered, its presence like the shifting of dimensions. And yet, they are still here. We are the ones who left. Was silent. The Wraith turned toward looking out at the distant blue marble that was Earth. It was not fear that made the conclave agree to stay away. Not entirely. Fear of their weapons, their unpredictability, that is what we tell ourselves. It paused. But the truth is simpler. Mechanical limbs tensed. What truth? The Wraith Sovereign's shadowed form seemed to grow darker. We did not decide to leave Earth alone because we feared losing a war. It turned its head slightly, as if looking at, from within the world itself. We left because we feared winning. Mind raced through the implications. That is nonsense. Victory is the ultimate objective of war. Is it? The Wraith's voice was barely above a whisper. Tell me, Supreme Strategist. What happens when you conquer a species that refuses to be conquered? When you break them, only to find they do not stay broken? When your soldiers fight them, only to return changed, no longer loyal to you, but to them? It let the words settle, the weight of them pressing down like gravity. How do you rule those who will never stop fighting? Could see it now, the horrifying logic of it. If they conquered Earth, it would not end there. Humans would resist, not just with weapons, but with ideas. With defiance. They would burrow into the cracks of the empire, infect its people with their relentless spirit, their refusal to accept servitude. And in the end, the conquerors would not remain conquerors. They would be the ones change. The Wraith Sovereign drifted away, its form dissipating into the shadows once more. The conclave made the only rational decision. It said, it was fading. We did not abandon war because we feared their strength. We abandoned it because, in the end, they would have made us one of them. As the Wraith Sovereign vanished, leaving only the cold silence of space, remained standing at the. He watched Earth, that insignificant blue world that had defied 12 of the most powerful civilizations in existence. For the first time in his life, the greatest strategist of the Apex Conclave had no plan, no counter, no solution. Because in his heart, he knew the truth. The war had never truly been theirs to win.